Imagine picking up a smartphone that feels instantly familiar, yet fundamentally different from anything running Android or iOS today. As you unlock the screen, there are no ads, no tracking prompts begging for permission, no hidden services phoning home in the background. Instead, what you're holding feels like a pocket-sized Linux computer, carefully designed to respect your privacy, your freedom, and your control. This is the idea behind the Linux Mint phone. A concept that in 2025 no longer feels like science fiction but like a very real possibility, driven by years of progress in mobile Linux, open source communities, and growing dissatisfaction with mainstream smartphone platforms. To understand why a Linux Mint phone could genuinely replace Android for many users, we need to look at where Linux Mint comes from, how mobile Linux has evolved, and why the timing in 2025 might finally be right. Linux Mint has always been about balance. From its early days as a beginner-friendly desktop distribution based on Ubuntu, it focused on simplicity, stability, and user choice. While other Linux distributions chased cutting-edge features or radical new workflows, Mint concentrated on making Linux comfortable and reliable for everyday users. The Cinnamon desktop environment is a perfect example of this philosophy, offering a traditional layout that feels intuitive without sacrificing modern features. Translating this mindset to a smartphone immediately raises an interesting question. What if a phone worked like a Linux Mint desktop, just scaled down and optimized for touch? Not a lockdown appliance, but a real personal computer in your pocket. The idea of Linux on phones is not new. Over the years, we've seen projects like Ubuntu Touch, Sailfish OS Plasma Mobile, Postmarquitos, and more recently, the steady improvements in hardware support for devices like the PinePhone and Librem 5. These efforts prove that Linux can run on mobile hardware, handle phone calls, messaging, cameras, and even deliver a usable touch interface. However, most of these projects struggled with polish, performance, or app availability. What makes the Linux Mint phone idea exciting in 2025 is that many of those early hurdles have been slowly eroded. Mainline Linux kernel support for ARM devices has improved dramatically. Wayland has matured, power management is better than ever, and containerized app formats like Flatpak make software distribution far easier. In this context, a Linux Mint phone would not be starting from scratch. Instead, it would build on years of work done by the broader Linux community. Imagine Linux Mint adapting Cinnamon or developing a mobile-friendly variant specifically for phones, something that keeps the familiar Mint aesthetic while embracing gesture-based navigation, adaptive layouts, and touch-optimized apps. The goal wouldn't be to mimic Android or iOS, but to offer a coherent alternative that feels like Linux Mint through and through. A clean interface, a simple settings app, and sensible defaults that just work without overwhelming users. One of the strongest arguments for a Linux Mint phone replacing Android lies in privacy and transparency. Android, despite being open source at its core, is deeply entangled with Google services on most devices. Even when users disable certain features, many background processes remain opaque. A Mint-based phone, by contrast, could ship completely free of proprietary tracking components. Users would know exactly what software is running on their device, could inspect the source code, and could remove or replace components if they choose. In an era where data collection has become a major concern, this level of transparency is incredibly appealing. Another key advantage would be system updates. Android updates are notoriously fragmented, with many devices receiving security patches for only a few years, if at all. A Linux Mint phone could follow a rolling or long-term support update model similar to desktop Mint releases, delivering timely security updates directly to users without relying on carriers or manufacturers. Because Linux Mint emphasizes stability, updates would prioritize reliability over flashy changes, reducing the risk of breaking essential functionality. For users tired of being abandoned by manufacturers after 2 or 3 years, this alone could be a game changer. Then there's the question of applications, often cited as the biggest obstacle for any Android replacement. In 2025, the situation looks very different than it did a decade ago. Progressive web apps are more powerful, more responsive, and capable of offline operation. Many popular services already work exceptionally well in the browser. On top of that, Linux has access to a massive ecosystem of desktop applications that could be adapted for mobile use. With responsive design, adaptive UI frameworks, and containerized packaging, many Linux apps could run on a phone with minimal modification. For productivity-focused users, This opens up exciting possibilities. Imagine running a real Linux terminal, a full LibreOffice suite, or powerful development tools directly on your phone, especially when connected to an external display and keyboard. This convergence between phone and desktop is another area where a Linux Mint phone could shine. Instead of treating the phone as a separate, limited device, Mint could embrace the idea of a unified computing experience. When docked, the phone could transform into a full Linux desktop, complete with windowed applications and multitasking. This concept has been explored before, but Linux Mint's focus on usability could finally make it accessible to non-technical users. One device for communication, work, and entertainment, all running the same operating system and sharing the same files and settings. Hardware is, of course, a crucial part of the equation. For a Linux Mint phone to succeed, it would need solid hardware support out of the box. That means open drivers where possible, good camera performance, reliable cellular connectivity, and efficient power management. In 2025, this is far more achievable than in the past. Several chip manufacturers are now working more closely with the Linux community, and the demand for open, auditable software has increased. A Mint phone wouldn't necessarily compete with flagship Android devices in raw performance, but it wouldn't need to. Its appeal would be in control, longevity, and freedom rather than benchmark scores. Another interesting aspect is customization. Linux Mint users love the ability to tweak their systems, and the phone version could bring that same flexibility to mobile. Users could choose different launchers, themes, and workflows without rooting or jailbreaking. Power users could script automations, modify system behavior, and even compile their own kernels if they wanted to. At the same time, Mint's philosophy would ensure that default settings remain friendly and approachable for newcomers. The key would be offering depth without forcing complexity. Security would also be a major selling point. Linux's permission model, combined with modern sandboxing technologies, could provide strong isolation between apps. Users would have clear visibility into what each application can access, and permissions could be managed in a straightforward way. Because the system is open source, security researchers could audit the code, identify vulnerabilities, and contribute fixes. This collaborative approach contrasts sharply with the closed, opaque security models of mainstream mobile operating systems. Of course, replacing Android doesn't mean appealing to everyone. The Linux Mint phone would likely attract a specific audience first: privacy-conscious users, Linux enthusiasts, developers, and people frustrated with the direction of modern smartphones. But history shows that platforms often start with niche audiences before breaking into the mainstream. Android itself began as an alternative embraced by tinkerers before becoming dominant. If a Linux Mint phone can deliver a smooth, reliable experience while clearly communicating its benefits, its user base could grow steadily. The role of community cannot be overstated. Linux Mint has always benefited from an active, passionate community that contributes code, documentation, translations, and support. A phone project would amplify this dynamic. Users could help port apps, report bugs, suggest features, and even contribute directly to development. This sense of shared ownership is something proprietary platforms struggle to replicate. When users feel invested in a project, they're more forgiving of imperfections and more willing to help improve the ecosystem. Another factor pushing the idea forward in 2025 is regulatory pressure. Governments around the world are increasingly scrutinizing big tech companies over privacy, competition, and user rights. Alternative platforms that emphasize openness and user control could benefit from this changing landscape. A Linux Mint phone wouldn't just be a technical product. It would also be a statement about digital autonomy. Owning a device that truly belongs to you, rather than to a corporation's ecosystem, resonates strongly in today's climate. There's also the question of sustainability. Modern smartphones are often designed for short lifespans, with sealed components and limited repairability. A Linux Mint phone could embrace more modular, repair-friendly hardware, supported by software updates for many years. This approach aligns well with the values of the open-source community and appeals to environmentally conscious users. A phone that lasts longer, receives updates longer, and can be repaired more easily is not just good for users, but for the planet as well. Critics might argue that without access to popular Android apps like certain social media platforms or banking apps, a Mint phone would struggle. This is a valid concern, but the gap is narrowing. Many services now offer web versions that are nearly indistinguishable from native apps. Additionally, compatibility layers and container solutions could allow some Android apps to run on Linux, at least as a transitional measure. While this wouldn't be perfect, it could ease the migration for users not ready to give up specific apps entirely. What truly sets the Linux Mint phone concept apart is its philosophy. It's not about chasing market share or maximizing engagement metrics, it's about empowering users. From the moment you power on the device, you'll be reminded that this is your phone, running software you can understand, modify, and trust. Notifications wouldn't be designed to addict you, and the interface wouldn't constantly nudge you toward proprietary services. Instead, the experience would be calm, predictable, and respectful of your time. In practice, using a Linux Mint phone in daily life could feel refreshingly different. You might start your day by checking messages through an open-source messaging client, browsing the web with a privacy-focused browser, and managing tasks with a simple, efficient app. When you need to get work done, you could connect the phone to a monitor and continue seamlessly on the same system. At night, you'd know that your device isn't silently harvesting data while you sleep. As we look ahead, the idea of a Linux Mint phone replacing Android in 2025 doesn't seem unrealistic anymore. The technology is maturing, the community is ready, and the demand for alternatives is growing. While it may not dethrone Android overnight, it doesn't have to. Even carving out a meaningful niche would be a significant achievement, proving that there is room in the smartphone world for platforms built on openness, trust, and user freedom. In the end, the Linux Mint phone represents more than just another operating system. It represents a different vision of what a smartphone can be. Not a black box controlled by distant corporations, but a transparent, adaptable tool that serves its owner. If Linux Mint were to bring its desktop philosophy to mobile in a thoughtful, user-centered way, 2025 could be the year we finally see a genuine, practical alternative to Android emerge. And for many users, that might be exactly what they've been waiting for.